Why aren't any black people in almost all of the World War II movies? I've been on a war movie binge watching movies like Saving Private Ryan, Hacksaw Ridge, Unbroken, etc. I just find myself fascinated by these amazing stories and have crazy respect for people putting their lives on the line for their country. However, as a person of color myself, I couldn't help but notice the absence of people of color in all of these movies. I know for a fact black people served in World War II most purposely put on the front lines, and it's crazy to me how I haven't seen one black actor/actress while watching these movies. Almost as if black people or people of color didn't serve their country. I can help but be a bit frustrated. If you all know of any World War II movies with people of color, may you please list them in the comments? Segregation was still a thing in World War II. There were all black units. Because segregation existed back then and they had all black companies, battalions etc. Segregation. But the Tuskegee Airmen, Miracle at St. Anna, Redtails, Black Brigade, Overlord. Not only were they segregated, but a large majority of black units were not frontline fighting units or in combat arms roles. The Black Panthers, Red Tails and other black combat units were outliers, though the units that did see combat usually served with distinction. But also yes, until the last 15-20 years those stories generally went untold in cinema. Glad they're getting exposure now. None of the major powers had a substantial percentage of black people, and those who did serve were in racially segregated units. To be historically accurate, the movie would have to be about a black-only unit such as the 92nd Infantry Division, which was portrayed in the 2008 film Miracle at St. Anna. I mean, the armed forces were still segregated during World War II, so black Americans in uniform were largely relegated to support positions like driving trucks, unloading ships, being cooks, etc. They were kept far away from the fighting for the most part. But there were some exceptions. There was a quote by Patton talking about a black regiment when there was concern that they didn't have the fighting spirit or the right stuff, or however they wanted to verbalize their racism. And Patton basically said, I don't care what color their skin is as long as they can kill Germans. Segregation. But also out of the millions of men the US sent to Europe, about 200,000 were black. And more than half of them didn't serve in combat roles. So proportionally there were very few of them. And if you're going to have films about infantry units, it's almost certainly going to be all white. Unless it's about a very specific group of soldiers. Black people during the war rarely ever served on the front lines. They were mostly ancillary staff. Supply. This was all pre-civil rights. There were all black units. Most notably the Tuskegee Airmen. The Navajo were also another ethnicity marginalized, but their language proved impossible for Japanese to crack and was used as a means of communication in the Pacific Theater. Red Ball Express. Miracle at St. Anna. There are few set in the Korean War. Steel Helmet. All the Young Men. MASH. Even though black people were segregated in the U.S. military during WW2, you can still find them in what roles they would typically have if you pay attention to certain movies. I believe I've seen black people in Fury, Band of Brothers, and Saving Private Ryan in the role of truck drivers and carrying M1 carbines. Which is historically accurate. There wasn't desegregation in the military until the Korean War. Wish there were more Korean War movies out there. Harry Truman integrated the military by executive order in 1948. After World War II had ended, the Korean War was the first war the U.S. fought where blacks and whites served in the same units. World War II took place in the 1940s. segregation was still very much the rule in most institutions. Men of Honor Cuba Gooding Jr. stars as the first black Navy diver. Though that might have been post-World War II. Still a good movie. Most people of color in the 30s-40s were relegated to cooks and cleaning. United States was 92 white. Watch Miracle at St. Anna. The armed forces were still segregated in World War II. Redtails, The Muskogee Airmen, and Windtalkers are some great movies that represent POC service experience in World War II. I knew a World War II vet pretty well. He talked about one of his platoon from the South saying he was going to kill the next NR he saw. The next one was a supply truck driver and he shot him dead. Also there was a whole platoon of black soldiers killed. He thinks our own forces did it. Dirty Dozen. Jim Brown is a boss in that movie. There are tons, but until the 60s, it wasn't as mainstream. Expand your movie viewing. It didn't just happen to black Americans, there were segregated units of Hispanics, Japanese, and even Native Americans. Code Talkers is a solid one about Navajo radiomen who served in the Pacific. I don't think most black people who served in WW2 were purposely put on the front lines. In fact, from what I've read, the opposite was true. They were kept in the rear in logistics roles, and those who made it to the front lines had to fight to get there because racist white leadership didn't think them capable of fighting. So I think it was rare to see blacks in fighting roles in WW2. Hence why it's rare to see them in WW2 movies. Vietnam War movies are very different. Lots of black men are portrayed in fighting roles. They weren't purposely put on the front lines. The opposite actually. The military was segregated and African American servicemen were often rear echelon units. Few successfully made their way to frontline fighting. That's why you don't see them portrayed often in movies. U.S. units were segregated through WW2. Hollywood movies were made to make money and the biggest audience was white people. Took a bit to get movies like Miracle at St. Anna. African Americans were put into their own units. Until 1948, most black soldiers serve in segregated units. The U.S. military was still segregated until 1948, so while there were plenty of black servicemen and women, they were segregated into their own battalions and regiments during World War II. A great movie to watch is Men of Honor with Cuba Gooding Jr. Robert De Niro. It's about Carl Bashir, the first black Navy rescue diver, who was able to pursue his goals after integration in 1948 but still faced a lot of discrimination and struggle. Another great movie is called Redtails, about the Tuskegee Airmen, who were a squadron of black fighter pilots in World War II. Going off to fight Nazis with a racially segregated army. I feel this has never gotten enough attention in the media. Because then they'd have to explain why the heroes were also bigots. Watch the Harry Potter films. Supposedly set in multicultural Britain. Over 8 movies, about 20 hours of screen time. You can count the people of color who have a speaking role on one hand. And none of these people of color characters are in the main cast, all side characters. Hollywood generally doesn't like to cast people of color to substantial roles. The pre-World War II armed forces were segregated. Some people will say it's because the Army war racially segregated during WW2. And that partly true. But also there are a lot of bias in the movie industry.